Welcome everybody. I'm so glad to see so many of you here. Particularly like to welcome the students who've come from a local school at the back. Thank you so much for joining us. We're delighted to have you here. I'm Professor Rosie Campbell, Director of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership here at King's College London. And I'm so pleased that so many of you have joined us tonight for this timely and incredibly important event, Women's Rights Under the Taliban, Out of the Spotlight, but Not Out of Harm's Way. When the Taliban seized control of Afghanistan in 2021, after 2 decades of democratic rule, the world watched in horror. Despite initial promises that women would be able to exercise their rights with Sharia law, the Taliban has systematically excluded women and girls from public life. In the months that have followed, the situation has only grown more desperate for Afghanistan's women, who now live under one of the most restrictive regimes in the world. Just last week, brave women protested in Kabul, defying a crackdown on dissent, to urge foreign nations not to formally recognise the Taliban. And this week, the UN held talks in Qatar in an attempt to press the Taliban to ease restrictions on women. With the outcome of these talks uncertain, and with the crisis against women and girls worsening and being compounded further by economic isolation, it is more important than ever that we keep the spotlight on women in Afghanistan and do whatever we can do to call for change. We will begin tonight with a screening of the award-winning 4-minute short film, Samira's Camera, which incredibly powerfully illustrates the plight of Afghan women during the regime change. And I'm delighted that the film's director, Paula Queskin, is able to introduce it for us. After that, we will introduce the rest of the distinguished panel to the stage for a conversation with the Global Institute's chair, GIWL. These women are truly remarkable and each have, in different ways, drawn attention to and provided voice to the women of Afghanistan. Zara Joya is a journalist and founder of Rukhsana Media, a news website telling stories of Afghanistan's women. In 2022, Zara was named as one of Times Magazine's Women of the Year for her reporting, and she remains in contact with her team who continue to send her reports from Afghanistan. Christina Lamb is Chief Foreign Correspondent at the Sunday Times, best known for her reporting on what war does to women. She's been covering Afghanistan since 1988 and has written 2 books on the country, as well as others, including the global bestseller, I Am Malala, with Malala herself. Saveto Mohammed Isuk is a women's rights advocate and a social entrepreneur from Afghanistan who writes and uses her stories about her own experiences as a woman entrepreneur to inspire, motivate, and encourage women to believe in themselves. And after we've heard from all of the speakers this evening, we'll have plenty of time for audience questions, after which you're welcome to join us for drinks and canapes in the atrium. I'm now going to hand over to Paula to introduce the film. Thank you, Paula.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's really such an honor to be able to share this film with all of you. I'm the founder and director of the 49%, which is a global women's media organization, and we use the power of media and film in order to advance global and social change. And so, as you can imagine, it's very important to us that we're able to share the films that we make and the films that others make with global audiences such as yourself. And Samira's Camera is an entirely true story. The name of the individual has been changed to protect her. It's a story that came to us. We've known the individual in the story for many years as a colleague, a fellow filmmaker, a fellow activist, a mother, a wife, and really one of the most brave individuals we've ever had a chance to connect with. And we believe so firmly that it is our responsibility to tell the stories of women who are unable to tell stories for themselves. The message that we've heard out of Afghanistan time and time again from our colleagues and friends is they're wondering, where are the voices of women and men in the West and in free countries who have the opportunity to speak out? And so this is one small contribution in order to amplify their voices. I'll be happy to talk to you all about it more, and for now, please enjoy Samira's camera.
It wasn't always this way. I was warmer. My house was cozy. I never shivered as I do today. There were always friends visiting. There was laughter and tea. We listened to music and ate good food and spoke our wildest dreams into reality. It wasn't that long ago, but now I am scared. The Taliban came to power and everything we had, everything I looked forward to, vanished. As a child, I loved to tell stories. While my mom cooked, I'd make up plays and force my cousins to perform. At night, I dreamt of stories. I kept a pad of paper next to my bed, and in the morning I scribbled as many details as I could before the day's sunlight would burn them away. I became a filmmaker. I wanted to tell my country's stories. I wanted to tell women's stories. But now, I am the story. We are in hiding, in a strange city, in a filthy apartment. My son cries at night. He's hungry and cold. My husband and I place him between us. His whimpers are mine, keep me awake. Through the window, I see the birds fly from tree to tree. And I envy their freedom. I should stay home, but I have a camera. And that is a privilege I mustn't squander. Last week, I got a text that we were to gather. There were dozens of us, moms and students, teachers, journalists. We demanded our freedom. We refused to accept this new reality. We took videos and sent them on WhatsApp. We told our friends in the West to post them. We were hoping the world would notice. They shouted at us, threatened us, cursed us. The next day, I got word. They took Mariam. They shot Samia in front of her children. Next there was Amira, Zainab, Fatima, arrested, beaten, disappeared. All in all, more than 40 women are gone. I see their faces when I close my eyes at night. I hear their screams and imagine their torture. I know there will be no good news, but I pray nonetheless. And I still have my camera.
Thank you very much to everybody for joining us, and thank you to Paula and to her team for that incredibly powerful film. We're now going to have a conversation about it, share some reactions and share some perspectives on what's happening for women and girls in Afghanistan. and then we will open up for audience questions, so we will have some time for you to ask some questions too. But I'm going to start now with Zara and ask her not only to reflect on the content of the film, but in the course of doing so to tell us something about your own story, because in many ways it seems to me your story captures some of the moments from the film. You're a girl who was so keen to become educated. There was a period when you dressed like a boy in order to be able to go to school, and you've clearly become motivated to tell women's stories through your media venture, which has a very special name, and you might want to tell us why it's named as it is.
Thank you very much. It is a great honor for me to be among you. Thank you so much for inviting me. So as you saw this film, it shows the reality, the real life of Afghan women and Afghan girls. This short video shows that how the life of Afghan women and girls has become changed. There is lots of changes. There is not a sustainable life exist in the country. That's absolutely heartbreaking, and thank you for documenting this video. So yeah, as you know, I was born in 1992 in Bamiyan provinces, a province of Afghanistan, which is a very remote area. And on that time, the first time of the Taliban, to be honest, when I'm describing my past life during the Taliban first role, it's absolutely a nightmare. And it is very heartbroken for me that on that time I forced to change even my identity and my clothes and everything. I changed my life and because of my desire to education and to school. And that's why sometimes I can't find to describe the situation of girls that now in the 21st century, they are deprived from very fundamental and basic rights. So they are not allowed to go to school, they are not allowed to even go to outside, and they are not allowed to wear what they like. So it's absolutely difficult for me. And also, it is, I think for me, it's a privilege, and I can say that education changed my life. I came through a difficult circumstance, and I studied law. I worked as a journalist since 2011 in Afghanistan. And in 2020, I decided to establish Rukhshana Media as a news agency to cover the stories of women, to give them a platform that they are voiceless. They didn't have this chance before to tell their personal experience. Because in my country, most of the time, women, they are very busy, and I'm sure in Afghanistan and other countries around the world, women and girls have been told that be silent. That's why at the beginning, a group of female journalists, we decided to create a platform for women. And we chose the name Rukhshana because Rukhshana was a 19 years old young girl in war provinces. In 2015, she was forced to force a marriage with a man that she didn't like him or love him. And then she fled from this forced marriage. And unfortunately, the Taliban on that time, on that area, they arrested her and stoned, and Rukhshana stoned and died very soon. And the death of the Rukhshana was recorded by a 30-minute short video, 30-second video. So I realized that, here we have a big gap. We don't have a special news agency or a media that focus on the Afghan women's issues that we really need, and we have to document it for the history and for the next generation, what happened in our life in Afghanistan under the Taliban.
Thank you. Thank you. Christina, I'm going to turn to you now. You are the Chief Foreign Correspondent at the Sunday Times. You've spent many years reporting from some of the hardest environments in the world, and as we heard in the earlier introduction, you very much specialised on trying to tell women's stories in conflict zones. Can I ask you your reaction to the film, to Samara's camera, but also the, part of the film, part of the conversation already is that we are no longer hearing the stories of Afghan women and girls, that through our media, whether it's the Sunday Times or other forms of mainstream media, those stories are no longer foregrounded. And can you talk to us about whether you think that's right and why that happens?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, great that we're having this event, right, to try and actually remind people of what's happening, because if you just think about it for a moment, for more than 20 months, girls in Afghanistan have not been able to go to high school. That's unbelievable. We are in the 21st century. And Paula, that film was, as Zara said, it's heartbreaking. Even knowing very well the situation, and probably like the rest of, like Zara, getting messages every day, WhatsApp messages from women still stuck in Afghanistan and in a desperate situation. When I've been 3 times since Taliban took over, now they're stopping female journalists, it seems, from going, so I have not been able to go recently. When they first took over, it was a huge shock to everybody. Even after going 3 times, I still don't get my head around it, really. I can't think of any other story I've covered that's so traumatic, to go and see Taliban everywhere. The hotel where I stay, which the Taliban in the past tried to blow up and killed people in the buffet, now the security is all done by Taliban. And lots of my female friends will say to me that they wish the West never came to Afghanistan because we created dreams that have just been shattered. And I feel personally, actually, I've talked to other female foreign journalists about this it's a weird thing about Afghanistan. There's a group of us women, like me, Lise Doucette, Lindsay Hilsum, Susanna George, the Washington Post. It seems to have been a story that women have really focused on for years. And I think we all feel like, did we do something wrong? Why did we not see that this was coming? And we feel very personally about the situation, how tragic it is, and angry that people were left in this situation, and that the world seems to want to move on. And I know people at the White House who have said to me that if the White House could just erase the word Afghanistan from the dictionary, they would do so, because it's a massive international embarrassment what happened. At least the United States has had a sort of inquiry into what happened. In this country, we haven't done that. We've had an inquiry into the evacuation, but that is just a part of it. We should be having a public inquiry into the last 20 years and how come, after spending all this money, so many lives lost, 471 British lives, but tens of thousands of Afghan lives, more than 100,000, for it to just end up with the Taliban coming back again. And when the Taliban first took over, there was a lot of discussion, the Taliban's changed, this is Taliban 2.0, you've probably heard that expression, and it won't be the same as before. Now, I didn't know, and I'd had some meetings with some of the Taliban ministers in the past, which made me think they haven't changed from some of the things that they'd said. However, I believed very strongly, and still believe, that Afghanistan had changed, that you have amazing women like these 2 women here that you've had 20 years of people being educated. Millions of people now have gone through education. Women were working as judges, as police chiefs, as film directors, as MPs. It wasn't easy, you can tell us that, I'm sure, being a woman, even in the previous situation. And there were a lot of people that caused problems for women. But you know, you could have dreams, right? And expect to be able reasonably to achieve them. And that's all gone. And the fact is that despite those changes in Afghanistan, which I would also include, apart from education, almost everybody's got smartphones, even in the remotest place. So it's very different to when the Taliban were in power before in the 90s, because at that point, Afghanistan was really cut off from the rest of the world. There weren't even landlines, let alone mobile phones. So people really didn't know. I mean, I remember going there after 9/11 and people saying to me, what is this building? What is this World Trade Center? How can there possibly be so many people killed in an attack? And because the highest building in Kabul at that time was 4 stories. They couldn't conceive, they hadn't seen pictures of anything like the World Trade Center. Now that's very different. Everybody's got mobile phones. Everyone sees what life is like outside. And also the media. I mean, the one thing that I would say has been a success of Western involvement in Afghanistan was the media, that we had a very flourishing media in Afghanistan that was pretty much free. So I thought, okay, whatever the Taliban try to do, actually they can't be like they were before because of all these things. And because it's a very young population, like 70% under 30, all these people have grown up in a different way. But I was wrong, because the Taliban have done exactly what they did before. They have, it's pretty much textbook copy of what they did in the 90s. They've, you know, first banned girls from going to high school, then from university, then women from working. Now we've had, like, women can't go to the park, women can't go to the gym. I guess there's a few things that they haven't liked. Before, women weren't allowed to wear lipstick or white shoes or shoes that clicked. And I mean, sooner or later, I guess these restrictions will happen. One friend of mine in Afghanistan said to me, soon they're going to say that there's not enough oxygen in Afghanistan, so only men can breathe. You know, it is. And the world kind of sits by. Now, I think that partly no one really knows what to do, because the leverage that everyone thought they had with the Taliban, which was that they needed money, because as you know, the other tragedy in Afghanistan at the moment is it has what the UN calls the world's worst humanitarian crisis. And personally, I've reported on, you know, people selling their children, their babies, their kidneys, people committing suicide because the situation's so desperate. It's really, you know, it's very hard. I wrote last year that in 35 years of reporting, I've never seen such a terrible situation, and I meant it. And so people thought, okay, the Taliban needs to be able to feed people in this situation, so they need international aid, and therefore they will agree to allow, I mean, this shouldn't be a question of allowing, they will agree for girls to go to school, women to go to work. But the fact is, my impression from talking to Taliban officials is they really don't care. They say things like, oh, well, Allah will provide. Well, Allah is not providing. Or they will say, you know, we lived in the mountains for 20 years on stale bread, so, you know, people can survive. So it's very difficult. What's your leverage when you're dealing with a regime that actually doesn't really care about what happens to its own people? But, you know, perhaps it cares about its fighters who are going hungry. And we also have seen these divisions in the Taliban, which is very different to when they were in power before, and it was a homogenous group. This time, there are definite rifts between what people call the hardline Taliban, and somebody today described to me as the saner Taliban, and the sort of pragmatists in the middle. So, you know, there is some scope, I think, for the outside world in dealing with the Taliban through that, and I really, you know, don't think the answer is disengaging. I think we can't just pretend it will go away. We do have to engage, but you know, it has to be an engagement with something back in return. It can't just be like giving to the Taliban, and that's very difficult.
Thank you. I'm going to turn now to Sveto, and your advocacy and activism is built in many ways around trying to tell the many layers of women's stories in Afghanistan. You don't want us to see any of the precious individuals there as stereotypes. You want us to see the fuller, rounder story. Can you talk to us about that and about what's motivated you to be at the forefront of this activism?
Yeah, thank you so much, Julia, and thank you so much for organizing this such an important event. I think we need to have more of these to kind of keep back. And I love the title of the Out of the Spotlight, but that's literally true. Nobody cares more about Afghanistan, so these kind of discussions are important. About the question, yes, so when I meant the stereotypes, what I mean is that how in general Afghan women are portrayed as passive victims, very weak, people who need pity. I think that's completely not true because in my opinion, Afghan women are the strongest women. They are very powerful, they're very strong, they're leaders in their communities, they're leaders in their families, they are capable and leaders. And I think that was very much proved after the collapse of Afghanistan. We have seen women protesting on the streets, so they didn't stay silent, they were not passive victims. They have turned their homes into secret schools, and the teachers have started volunteering, and they're not receiving salaries, but they're teaching kind of teaching the next generation of girls in their homes. And so women are doing a lot. And despite these problems, despite these circumstances and challenges that we are facing in Afghanistan. So I think it's very important to kind of have the approach, whether it's from humanitarian perspective or from journalism, from any side of perspective, to view Afghan women as not passive victims, of people who are actively trying to challenge their status quo and challenge the situation. And so right now, as was mentioned before by other panelists, that if you are a woman and girl in Afghanistan, you cannot go to school above 6th grade, you cannot go to university, you cannot work, you cannot go to gym or parks. So it's very devastating. However, if you see how motivated they are and how much they have thirst and passion for education, and here I would like to talk about my personal story. So in 2016, in August 2016, when I was studying and doing my undergraduate studies at the American University of Afghanistan in Kabul, it was attacked by the Taliban, and so over 15 students and staff were murdered, and so we actually had to stay at home for 8 months. And it's not easy when you stay at home, and I lost all my motivation at that time. I was about to give up because I had a dream of studying abroad and getting my master's in another country, and had all these dreams, but it was just vanished in front of my eyes, and I was stuck at home for 8 long months. So right now, we were lucky enough, obviously, because we did a lot of lobbying, and we had to convince the USAID and other organizations and the board of our university to reopen it, because there were rumors that it will be closed. The people who returned, the students, were over 90% of students were back. So that already shows the passion and commitment of the Afghan students. The Afghans are so, especially the Afghan youth, and Christina, you're so right, the Afghan youth, we have like a large population of the Afghan youth, and I think what we have in Afghanistan is that this passion for bringing positive changes and kind of empowering our communities and wherever they are. So I was running a business in Afghanistan, in Kabul, and I was involved in a lot of like youth communities. So we had a lot of. So when I talk about these things, people don't understand that we had such a bright and beautiful and driving youth, and we still have it, but they need to be supported. So I was involved in different youth organizations. So for example, a lot of like business accelerators and things like that. All the programs that you have in here, you would have there as well. So there was not a lot of difference. So so we have that's our strength, and I would definitely say that's our strength. And Christina, you're perfectly correct on that point about like technology. I think we know how to leverage technology. People are, especially the youth, and I'm speaking again like for the most of the urban part and rural part. We have a lot of issues. We had even before the Taliban regime, we had a lot of issues on that. Like a lot of aid was not going to the places that needs it to be, but that's another discussion. I'll leave that. That will take a lot of time to discuss and criticize because I'm such a critical person. I always try, okay, I try not to go to the negatives, but I'll stick to the positives. And yes, so right now, if you talk to any person, any girl who is stuck in her home, you will learn how she's not sitting silent. So she's taking online courses despite problems. So an Afghan girl in Afghanistan right now is facing electricity problems. So they don't have electricity all the time, like most of the time. She faces internet problems. So the internet is not as fast as here. Or they cannot afford because of the humanitarian crisis. So there are so many problems on multiple layers, but you still see how passionate they are and how much thirsty they are for education. And so through I run an NGO when we're working on awareness raising, capacity building programs, and also storytelling. And I'm really glad to see everyone is focused on storytelling. So because I feel like that's such a powerful tool to create change, including the policy changes and social changes. And one of the girls in one of the workshops that we had, she told me that how these kind of workshops, they're online, how it gives them hope. And how she feels alive again, and she feels that she has wings again. So that comment was very something that just went to my heart because I can totally understand her because I went through that process myself. Because I thought that, okay, I will not be able to finish my university, and there's so many people it was their last year of high school and they were about to graduate. So I think it's impacting them even more because they were about to go one step ahead of their to reaching their dreams. So yeah, so when discussing Afghan women, it's really important to keep that in mind, that they are capable if they will be given opportunities. And I think that's something that all of us in this room can do is to support. So the support that the international community can do is to amplify the local voices. So even now when I talk, I always share my story, or I talk to a person who is in Afghanistan, because I think we have to give platforms. And I honestly believe that Afghan women, or in general women from the global south, are not voiceless. And I don't know, I have a problem with that term as well. We have a voice, we just need to be given a platform. If you give a platform, and I'm really great that all the panelists here are giving platform through their own organizations, through their own work. So it's really important to give them platform, to hear their stories, to hear their perspectives, and because we have the solutions. A lot of right now local NGOs and local, not only NGOs, like businesses, are trying to fill the gap of humanitarian crisis, education crisis, everything they're doing, they just need support. So always try to listen to the Afghan women who is in Afghanistan, because she knows the solution and she will say that perfectly. And I would also like to mention one more thing, which is really important and essential, and it's something, so I moved to the UK since actually August 2021, the collapse of Afghanistan, and I've noticed one misconception about our religion. So I want to kind of clarify that, is that whatever the Taliban are doing is in complete contradiction to our Islamic teachings, to Islam. So whatever is happening there, you shouldn't think that it is what the religion of Islam is. Because our religion gives the right to women to study, to work, to run businesses, to go to gym, to go to park, to do all the things that they have banned. And the first word actually that was revealed, it was Iqra. Iqra means read. And then our Prophet's saying is that it's compulsory upon every Muslim man and women to seek knowledge and education. So education is a very fundamental Islamic right, and that's what Afghan women want. They don't want anything extra. They just want their Islamic rights, because Islam gives every right to a woman and a man as well. But like right now with the situation in Afghanistan, they are only using that women's rights as to just develop their own or going through their own agenda, which I don't know which agenda is that, because I don't see it as Islamic at all. Yeah, thank you. So I'm sure, I hope that I didn't talk a lot, because when I start, like, it's a bit hard.
It's okay. I'm going to turn now to Paula, and congratulations again on the film. Can you talk to us about how you first got engaged? There's obviously a backstory here, a personal story, that led you to creating a work with such passion at its centre. And what has the film done so far? What have you been, how have you been exposing the film, and how do you think it's carrying the story that we want heard around the world?
Thank you. It's really just such an honor to be sitting here with you all, and thank you for coming. I mean, I see men in the room, women in the room. I think that's really important. Every person that's here, you have a voice, and you are able to then take what you've learned tonight and pass this along. So I don't take any of that lightly, and that's exactly why we made this film. I'm a human rights lawyer by training, and I landed a dream job, what I thought was out of law school, doing international humanitarian law, writing briefs based on different rights issues for the United Nations. And I think 6 months in, I was so disillusioned by the international landscape and the lack of real tangible change. And luckily, at that time, I was able to get involved with a film project, and I fell in love. And you know, as most theater kids, we really are just always trying to get back to that part of ourselves, that creative, passionate part. And I was very grateful to have the chance to see the impact that film could have. That first film was called Honor Diaries. It actually had a big impact here in the United Kingdom, in which we were able to speak openly about honor-based violence. And within a year of the film's release here in the UK, forced marriage became a criminal offense. And so from that moment on, I was totally hooked, and I saw how we can use film and media and harness its power to really see tangible, specific change. That work with Honor Diaries really organically got me involved with lots of different communities who suffer from different women's rights issues. There's a lot that connects us in the world. Unfortunately, one of those things that connects us in all communities is a lack of women's rights. No matter what community we come from, I think we can all acknowledge that women suffer tremendously. And I personally think that there's a lot of solidarity and a lot of potential in women from disparate communities in different faith backgrounds coming together and amplifying one another's voices and finding the common denominator to be able to then create change for all of us. So long story short, being involved in film for the last 10 years, the woman that you saw portrayed in the film, Samira, reached out to my colleague Dana and I in August of 2021, desperate for help to leave the country. And while I know a lot about humanitarian law, I'm not a humanitarian aid worker. But we got to work right away, WhatsApping, emailing, calling, and really trying to do anything we could to get our friend and colleague out of harm's way. We thought it would take a month. We just like begged, borrowed, and steal cash to try to get a plane ticket for her and her family, her son and husband, who you saw. And over a year later, we were not successful. And I just want to acknowledge, you can tell by my accent, I am an American citizen, and you referenced it in your remarks. The US has failed abysmally, not only in the way that this crisis was handled, but now in their lack of action in resettling refugees and accepting refugees, and they have not committed to their promises. I can't speak so much to the United Kingdom, but the European Union and many of the countries in the world made promises in writing that they have not kept. And that is something that all of us can hold our governments accountable to. So that's why for month after month after month, while we had a plane ticket in hand, not one country opened up their borders to our friend. And we were able to keep her in safe houses, and I will report that gratefully she is now in Pakistan on a visa. We're hoping that she can be safe there for a while, and we are hoping to help her resettle. I have to tell you, I never thought that this work in creating film and speaking out would lead to this, to actually working in a humanitarian way. But it is truly the most logical step, and it is incumbent upon each of us to find ways in which we can make someone's life easier. We are all sitting in positions of incredible privilege, and I'm sure in every single one of your communities, there is a refugee or someone who's seeking to be a refugee, who's, in that sense, maybe their family member or someone overseas. And please don't underestimate the power of your own voice and the privilege that those of us have who are in democratic countries. So we're still campaigning there. We've always been very passionate about telling women's stories, and now we also want to protect the storytellers. We think that that has just been the general evolution of our work, and we feel, like I mentioned at the beginning, that it is our responsibility to take this story and to bring it to the halls of power, to the decision makers who are basically just putting their heads in the sand, because we all know what's happening. And sometimes it's on the front page, but many, many times it's not. So last week we showed the film at the Canadian Parliament. We have an upcoming screening on Capitol Hill. We're looking at the European Parliament. We showed it in Paris. And we really want to get it into schools and educational facilities and use it as a catalyst, just like today. Thank you so much for allowing us to come here and spark this conversation. And I want to also acknowledge how important it is to continue to push these stories up. You'll notice that there's a big change happening in the world right now. The women of Afghanistan, I think it's safe to say, probably are in the most traumatic and horrendous situation from a rights-based perspective. However, we all notice what happened just a few months ago in Iran as women took to the streets. And I'm not an expert, but there's a lot in common in the cultures and the language of Afghanistan and Iran. There is an opportunity for working together, for using this momentum, and for continuing to pressure communities. Now, at the beginning, you'll notice the whole world was paying attention. And even there was a Grammy handed out to the most remarkable individual that wrote a song. But when was the last time you saw Iran on the front pages? When was the last time you saw Afghanistan on the front pages? We have a responsibility. We each have a smartphone. We each have Instagram. We can be disseminating these stories. They're happening every single day. And the struggles that women are facing in Iran and Afghanistan are unique. Each one has their unique stories, but like I said at the beginning, there's a thread of solidarity that exists through all the stories, whether in Slovenia, Poland, or elsewhere. And we need to be thinking about the commonalities that bring us together and how we can harness that and move forward. I just want to mention one more thing. You saw in the film, first of all, every single thing in the film is real, okay? It's just the names have been changed. And that protest was in January. I'm sure you remember that protest that we portrayed in the film was in January of 2022. Okay. Now that protest made at least the front page of the New York Times in the sense that it was above the folds on the on the online version, and there were a few follow-up articles, and there were women quoted. And our friends in Afghanistan told us that some women were released. Okay. Then a few weeks later, some have also been rearrested, but some were released. Then, a few weeks later, the Taliban, I think you might remember, I think they flew to Norway, if I'm not mistaken, and that week, no one was arrested, okay? Again, according to friends there. And then what happened? The camera that moved away. The newspapers stopped publishing it. And now it's just restriction after restriction after restriction. Okay? We have a responsibility. We need to make sure that we are amplifying these voices. And as my colleague mentioned, the women and men of Afghanistan are very powerful and very motivated, and they are finding multiple ways to be able to go around this system. There are organizations and institutions and businesses who are training Afghan women over Zoom and then trying to find ways to hire them, okay? There's an app called ASEEL, A-S-E-E-L. Download it. You can figure out ways to get aid to individuals in Afghanistan. There are many, many ways for us to reach out a hand and to show that we're not ignoring the situation. And I really believe through that solidarity, the international community will slowly find ways to make the situation better.
Thank you.
Can I just respond to being part of the media?
Yeah,
we are trying to cover
no, not
it.
you.
And I mean, one of the things I would say that is a bit very unfortunate in many ways, but it was the war in Ukraine. I mean, overnight took all the attention away from Afghanistan, and all of those restrictions, most of them anyway, happened once the war in Ukraine started, because nobody was looking at it. I remember being in Ukraine with some of the female correspondents I mentioned and getting the news of some of the restrictions, and we were like, we can't, believe that this is happening. So I think for the Taliban, the war in Ukraine has been very fortunate, and also for NATO, who, were very happy to have the spotlight taken off the failure of the biggest debacle, basically, in NATO's history. But one other thing I wanted to say, we were all talking a lot about women and women's rights and the brave women in Afghanistan, and you talked about the situation in Iran. One of the big differences between Afghanistan and Iran is that men came out on the streets in Iran.
Right.
I am very sad to see in Afghanistan, I've been to a number of these protests, which are very small. Men don't come. And that, to me, is perhaps the single biggest failure of what the West did in Afghanistan. It is completely pointless talking to women about rights and educating women and encouraging them to do things if you don't do anything whatsoever about the male mindset. And that's what's happened in Afghanistan. Lots of men in Afghanistan are happy with the situation. The Taliban didn't come from nowhere. Of course, there are plenty of people that support the Taliban. And I know plenty of people there who will say to me, there's no war now, it's safer, the Taliban are better at building roads and maintaining roads, they're better at collecting taxes. Okay, so girls can't go to school. And that is a massive failure of Western involvement in Afghanistan. And I think when we speak about women, we should also remember, and just to give a call out, I mean, there have been a couple of men there was the guy who ripped his degree up on, and a professor from Kabul University, and there's also Matiullah, who has been in jail for over a month now, who runs an organization called PATH, trying to spread education in Afghanistan. So, but we're talking about 2 people out of 40 million.
Yeah.
What would you say about that, the attitude that of men that's been raised, and the culture of sort of protest and resistance? I mean, I don't think any of us underestimate the courage and the peril that people who are resisting, women who are resisting, whether that is by protesting or secret schools, the truly horrific risks that they're running. I think we're filled with admiration, but I would be interested in your reflections on what do you think will happen next amongst the community in Afghanistan?
I absolutely agree with Kristen, because Afghanistan is a society dominated by men, but men, they don't make up the whole of society, right? Right now, half of the populations are women. So during these almost 2 years, the men showed that how they have a terrible mindset about Afghan women, or about women. So women, they were alone, and right now they are alone in the country. So they are protesting, they are fighting, but men, they are sitting, and they have the right to go to work, education. So they do freely the journey to going to from this province to another province, this city to another city. They are enjoying life, because when I'm talking, I'm touched with many Afghans because I'm a journalist. So when I'm talking with the people, the men said, oh yes, now, for example, in Nuristan, it was a very dangerous, or on Helmand, it was very unsafe provinces in Afghanistan. So now the men said, oh yes, we are driving, we are going to Nuristan, we are enjoying this natures, and that's absolutely, for sometimes it's crazy. And then they are allowed to do, so they just they change their clothes, they just change some, they have some hair in their faces, and then that's okay for them. And also it's a small group of men, they are advocating for Afghan women's rights, but it is absolutely not enough. We need more voices from women. So in my organization, in Rukshana Media, we called the women to write a letter for their daughters. Nobody do that because it's no matter for them. That's very heartbroken. And also, one thing that I'm really amazed that international community, sometimes they're sitting in the one table by men, not women, especially in Doha. It was a meeting. There was a meeting that they didn't even involve a single woman on that meeting. Yeah. So it is very, very crazy. So that's why Afghan women inside and outside of the country, they just trying to raising their voice up and up. And definitely, as my friends mentioned, we need support, your support. We need that. Please help us and show your solidarity that we can make a strong voice to the political games that right now they are the men domination playing with us.
Sorry, you're absolutely right. I think the international community should always send female delegations to meet the Taliban.
Exactly.
Sending all male delegations.
Was there anything you wanted to say on that point about men and solidarity, and then we'll go out for some questions?
Yeah, sure, just quickly.
Yeah.
Completely agree with whatever Zahra and Christina mentioned. Exactly, but I think we also need to I would definitely say celebrate those men who actually showed support. And I think that's the biggest problem that I've seen, that they're not as supportive as they should be. Because if the whole country will be supportive of the thing, but if you talk to men in Afghanistan, when I talk to people there, I have families, friends, and everyone, all the men are nobody's happy with the education part. Everyone's okay, they need to be educated. But when it comes to raising their voices and doing something, they just don't believe that it will work. Especially, I think, going on the streets and these things, it's a bit of they see it as something, I would definitely say not culturally appropriate, going on the streets and protesting. So I think that's the approach itself. They don't agree with it, the men. And that's why it causes the problem, and they're not supporting women, which is very unfortunate. But there should be some other strategies. I think it's time to re-strategize, I think, the activism on the ground, because activism inside and outside Afghanistan should be different, because it's not a democratic country, so there should be, even the women, they're very brave. I admire them. They are putting their lives on risk, but there should be more strategies, we should approach this strategically, especially inside Afghanistan. So, for example, a few men that support, we need to mobilize them. So there needs to be coalitions built, groups built, so that they will influence other men. So I think that's something that we can do, and that's definitely we can make it happen with the support of the international community, with the support of Afghan diaspora. Afghan diaspora is working so hard, even though half of my team, they became refugees, my family, friends, but it's so inspiring to see them. They're all over the world right now, but they're continuing their work. We see Zahra right now, she went through this whole evacuation process, which is very traumatic and very difficult. however, she didn't lose hope, and she's continuing her work. And like her, like there are millions of Afghan women and men I've seen here in the UK who are striving and making it happen. So I think there is hope, but we will not give up, and we'll continue our fight.
The other hope I have, last time I was there, I met an Afghan man, a tribal elder, you'd know who he was, who's very conservative. And he said to me, I am so fed up with the women in my house being at home all day, driving me mad. So, maybe.
Okay, I'm going to turn now for a few questions. If anybody's got a question, yes, please, in the front.
Good evening, everybody. It's been a privilege to participate in this event, and being part of King's community is a great opportunity for me to participate here today for the event. As an Afghan woman, as a graduate from King's College London, today I see panels sitting here and also audience joining this event, talking about Afghanistan's, particularly Afghan women. To point out to some of the comments that my respected Afghan sisters have pointed out, that Afghan society is a very male-dominated, and in Afghanistan, men don't support their daughters, their wives, or perhaps their children to go to school. I have objection on that, because if my father didn't allow me to go to university, I wouldn't have been coming here to London to educate and get my master's, traveling alone without a male partner, or perhaps my father or brother. That I want to point out. Over the 40 years, the Taliban has tried to influence the Afghan culture, which is not part of the Afghan culture at all. From their perspective, they are going to implement the Wahhabism type of Islam in Afghanistan, which in Saudi Arabia back in Hashemite dynasty once was criticized that such an ideology, if implemented in Saudi Arabia, will be a threat to the Islamic existence, even in Saudi Arabia. Now that the Wahhabism is in power in Saudi Arabia, they have supported this Taliban mindset in Afghanistan. We have seen this back in the 90s, where there was civil war, where they were fighting against the Mujahideen, and slowly they've taken the power. And then the invasion of US when they were outset of the power, and the new democratic system was built in Afghanistan, and then Afghans enjoyed the new process for democratic system in Afghanistan. Over these years, myself have strived to make my efforts positively to contribute to the Afghan society, to my country. I'm a veteran. I have worked in the armed forces of Afghanistan. I have worked as an arbiter. I have worked as a teacher. I have worked as a professor, or perhaps in many other sections, working with the UN and international organizations and various international delegations located in Afghanistan. But my question today is, when the US has handed over Afghanistan through a Doha deal to the Taliban, why didn't they hand it over the power officially to the Taliban? Now that all the women's right has been taken, the women and girls are not able to go to school, the 20 years of efforts has been destroyed. Now steps are slowly taken to recognize the Taliban. My question is, now why?
Christine, did you want to comment on that? And
Yeah.
I'll go it.
Well, you raised a number of issues. I mean, just on your objection to how we're characterizing men, I'm talking about since the Taliban took over that men haven't supported. I'm not saying that men stopped women from being educated before, but on the other points that you raise, I mean, yeah, personally, actually, I think maybe the best way of trying to get the Taliban to change their stance is for countries like Saudi Arabia to be speaking to them, and the Qataris and the Emiratis. To be fair, the Qataris have, but they're the ones that maybe the Taliban will listen to. They're not going to listen to a British official going to them and saying, look, this isn't really Islam, are they? Or an American. And in terms of the deal, obviously it was a very bad deal, right? But also the Taliban in that deal did agree various things that they're not doing. They promised to respect women's rights and to respect the Constitution, and so they've broken the terms of the deal. But it was a very bad deal, and it was a deal where actually there was no means of actually making sure that they implemented the things. So that's why we're in the situation we're in.
Okay, I'm going to take some more questions. So, yeah, up the back, thank you. And then I'll
Thank you so much. That was so powerful. A slightly strange question, perhaps. I mean, you've talked really brilliantly about the need for voice and what we can all do. But one of the things that's dominating the headlines today is artificial intelligence and the bias that's, the fear of bias. And can you talk a little bit about how conscious you have to be about, it's not a neutral marketplace, the media, as you've intended. Yeah. How can we make sure that, you're not drowned as there's inherent bias in a lot of the media and the social media. You're doing a fantastic job, but there are other trends out there. So I'd just be very interested in that other theme that's dominating the headlines today.
I mean, I think that's a very important question, and certainly is going to dramatically change media, the way we consume media, and pretty much anything that we read and anything that we see. I think, I spoke about this earlier today in a meeting. I mean, even if you see, much of what we consume in media is from Hollywood. I mean, there is sort of like a homogenous way of consuming media and understanding world events, and that comes through mainly Hollywood or American media. But I see that shifting also. I mean, there's a writer's strike right now. There are many layoffs in the industry. There's really a very big shift happening with streamers and access, and just the way in which we're understanding how individuals consume media, film, and whatnot. I definitely think we need to take skepticism. I think we need to understand that everything from the algorithm to AI is dictating what we're receiving. And so I really would suggest even getting back to very traditional forms of media, which is, I mean, I think what Sveta is doing right now. We also do a little bit of that where we get first-hand accounts. I mean, we're really trying to just be quite old-fashioned, asking people questions who are experiencing it and then putting it out into the world. Now, of course, you have to know who to trust and whatnot, but I think that just person-to-person storytelling, getting information, finding trustworthy sources, I think that's a really powerful way to combat this other wave of coming of artificial intelligence, is really going specifically to individual stories and learning about an individual's experience. But I do think that we do have to bring a healthy sense of skepticism, and to understand that what we're consuming has been curated for us. And so in that sense, then we have to outsmart the artificial intelligence. Open up a newspaper you're not usually reading, right? Or spend some time once a week. I'm not saying every day. Spend some time once a week and figure out what the talking heads are saying on the complete opposite side of a conversation. I think there's a way. I still believe in our own intelligence. I'm not worried about the arts, for example. I'm not. I mean, I'm happy for ChatGPT to program a new app, but you're never going to replace what it means for someone to tell their story or to write a movie or to create animation with pen and paper. So I wouldn't despair, but I would be very, very skeptical.
Okay. I'll take the two questions here. Yes, you and then you. There's just here. Yeah. Oh, either way, whichever way.
Thank you for your talks. They were amazing. Sveta, you mentioned how you think there's a common misconception that what the Taliban believes in is also what the Islamic faith believes in. And I was just wondering if you could talk on what you think like the biggest challenges are around that, and how we as like an international community and as a non-Islamic woman can do about changing that conversation.
Yeah.
Yep, and I'll just hold that thought, and I'm going to get the question behind too. Yep. If you do your question now.
Sure.
Yep.
I wanted to thank you all for bringing your personal and professional experience to the discussion. It's greatly appreciated, and for sharing. I wanted to ask a little bit more about, we've talked about the American-led Western intervention and the withdrawal, the mistakes that were made along the way, as well as Christina mentioned at the beginning some of the advancements that technology has brought, or that men's changed perspectives have brought, that education, as it was brought into Afghanistan. What are some of the lessons I think that the world could learn from these interventions, and how would that shape the, I guess, liberated future that we're all hoping for in terms of a modern Afghanistan, the carrots and the sticks of the world, what can be used, and if anyone has any insights on what that future path looks like, learning from those lessons.
Yeah, I can actually go with both.
Both. Yeah, sure. Go right.
Yeah, before, I hope I'll not forget. Okay, so the first question about the Islam, I think the first thing is that to just like, I think just reading about our religion, and because we have had, in our religion, we have had amazing women who are businesswomen, leaders, teachers, all these histories is very powerful, and it shows that there are rights for women. And in terms of how that impacts with the Taliban, I think it's very important, especially now with the approach. I think I strongly believe, and I always advocate for, whenever engaging with the Taliban, always bringing that Islamic perspective, like engaging with Islamic countries, bringing them to the table, telling them that this is not what you're preaching and what you're saying is wrong, just challenging them. And they can be challenged, right? Because it's true what we're saying, and it's not what they're saying is complete contradiction, and we have evidence and facts, and it's fact. So I think that's something that can be used, and it's happening already, like in like the Doha meeting and others. So we need to increase that, and I always advocate for engagement and discussion and dialogue, because we are tired of war. We are a nation that has been seeing war for over 4 decades, and we cannot simply afford that anymore. And we don't have that we don't want that. And honestly, nobody wants war. So I think that's something that I always advocate, is through engagements and through the Islamic perspective, bringing that, challenging them directly. On your question, honestly, it's a lot. I can talk about for days about the intervention of the international community, and I strongly feel like there's a lot of mistakes. So first of all, I'll mention one is it was very top-down approach, not really listening to the Afghan culture, not really understanding them, really not listening to the Afghan voices. And that's something that I'm always advocating, because I feel like Afghans have the solution. They need to be brought in the decision-making processes, whether it's writing a project on Afghanistan from an NGO perspective, or a humanitarian, really bringing Afghans on the table. I think that's something that the international community can learn from the past 20 years, and really focusing on a few really focusing on Band-Aid solutions as well, not really thinking in a sustainable way, something that empowering, even all these projects, because I've worked in a few projects in Afghanistan on women's issues, and I could see how little impact they had, and there could be more impact if they were not super concerned about having that gender equality only for the sake of having the name, and not really caring about the impact. So I think that's something that from a humanitarian project perspective that we can learn. Yeah, so I think that's a mistake that I could mention.
Can I also comment on that?
Yeah, because you referred earlier to the need for an inquiry. Yes.
I mean, it's an excellent question, and so I actually, just to plug I wrote a whole book called Farewell Kabul, which is on the mistakes which was before the Taliban took over. I wrote that book, which was on all the mistakes that were being made. But my frustration is because I've been a foreign correspondent for a long time, so I've covered the war in Afghanistan, but also the war in Iraq, in Libya, and in Syria. We make the same mistakes every time. It's incredibly frustrating as a journalist because we feel like, or some of us feel like we're reporting these things. It's not a mystery. And then we watch exactly the same things happen. And in each of these cases, actually, the removal of Saddam Hussein or the toppling of the Taliban was pretty straightforward. It took 45 days in one place, 60 days in another, because we had overwhelming military superiority and air power. But the problem is what you do next. And in none of those cases did we seem to have thought that through. I mean, there was just no, I remember before the war in Iraq, here in London, going and talking to people in Whitehall, asking what was the plan for after Saddam was removed. And nobody would tell me, and I just thought they weren't telling me. I didn't ever think there's no plan. And so, yeah, it's been pretty frustrating to watch. And, recently, a year or so ago, I went to Syria, which is now, talk about Afghanistan being forgotten. Syria is completely forgotten, and, the war has continued. And I went to the camps of ISIS fighters and women and children. Now, there are 60,000, mostly women and children, locked up, basically detained in the most horrific camps in Syria. Many of them are from Europe or the United States or Australia, and the UK in particular has not wanted to take its citizens back and basically pretended that if you don't do anything about it, it's not your problem. It is your problem. They're your citizens. And actually what we've done, worse than that, is we have stripped citizenship. Do you know that United Kingdom, after Bahrain, is the country that has most stripped citizenship in the world? So, yeah, I can't give you a good answer on this. I just despair that I just see over and over again the same mistakes being made.
Right, we're going to have one last question. We'll just take one question here. Thank you.
I think the journalists and to the media, Paula, the thing that really hit me was where are the voices of the women in the West who have their freedom? And I think what's interesting is that there have been some interesting things happening lately. I heard Olga the other night about Ukraine, but I also heard, I think it's Rousseau, I may have the name wrong, but she said, and then they came for the journalists. What happened after that? We don't know what happened after that. And it's happening here in terms of the BBC World Service, who I believe are broadcasting lessons to Afghani women, but the World Service has been amalgamated and aid is being cut back. So we're losing voices here. Wake up, people. It's not just there. We have to represent these people because we are not next, but down the line.
Now, I'm going to do something sneaky because there's a question behind you, Latika, given the mic's just there. Yep.
Thanks, PM. Nice to see you. And I think I'll speak for everyone saying kudos for using your platform to raise this issue. My question's actually for you, no surprises. You were PM during a time where this war was raging, and obviously you weren't PM when it began. But do you think Christina is right there when she says, in retrospect maybe, what did we do when we gave these women all these freedoms that now they've had so disastrously taken away from them? And a question for the wider panel as well. Is there a point where recognition of the Taliban is something that governments should consider to try and improve rights for women, or is this non-negotiable forever?
Okay. Well, I'll answer quickly, and then I'm going to give the panel, I'll go through one by one, the opportunity to answer your question, but also to offer a last reflection. I mean, we could talk a long time about Afghanistan and all of the phases of it. When I was Prime Minister, the phase that we were in was training Afghan local forces and also a lot of aid and development work, and I do think that that was making a difference, though I absolutely acknowledge that from everyone's perspective there was insufficient listening to local voices and what would be most impactful. And of the errors that I think get committed in these various conflicts, the limitations on bringing local people who really have the knowledge and the power and the insight to make a difference into the rebuilding process, I think is very, very telling. But I'm very conscious that many Australians did remarkable things in Afghanistan. Some didn't come home. And when we're reflecting on all of it, where Afghanistan is now, but also the conflict, then we need to think that perspective through too. And I think that there's much for all of the nations who are involved to think through on that. But let me just give a last word across the panel in answer to Latika's question about the Taliban recognition, future strategies, but also anything you'd like to say as a last message. So Paula, we'll start with you.
Well, my instinct is not to recognize the Taliban, but we have to listen to the women in Afghanistan. That's the message that I've received, and that's the learning that I've received. And I think with other tyrannical, murderous regimes over the course of history, I think that recognition is not suitable, and history shows us that. If I would leave one question for you all, I would say, why women? Why is this happening to women? Why is it then when these regimes take over, that's the first thing they do, is strip women's rights? And I want to look at, I like to take a global perspective when I ask that question. And I think we should all be asking ourselves that question every day, and how we can make changes in our own communities to fight back against that reality.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, with whatever is happening right now, recognition is definitely not an answer, because what's happening is however, I also strongly believe that the Taliban are also Afghans, and they are part of Afghanistan, and we have seen the past 20 years they were continuously fighting, and so there's not like a simple formula of like just doing like this and they're gone. So they are Afghans, they are part of Afghanistan. So I strongly believe in the inclusive government, so having different voices, because we are Afghans, we are from Afghanistan, but we also a very diverse country, and there's a lot of conflict because of that also. So really listening to different tribes and having that forming a government, and definitely the Taliban, because I also want to remind people that the Taliban are also, they have different divisions, they're very complex structure, so there are good people inside them as well. Yeah, so that's something that I want to mention. And also before, like the last thing that I want to mention is that please, I don't want this to be another just discussions without any results. So if you can just amplify the voices, whatever we have talked about here, or help, whether it's like through volunteering with your refugee communities, helping Afghan refugees who are still stuck in most of the hotels in the UK right now. And there's so many other, like amplifying the voices, the local voices, sharing the news, use your social media. So right now, the digital world, you can just write a tweet, and I think that will help so much to the women and girls in Afghanistan. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So as I mentioned before, Afghanistan is a diverse country. So there are lots of different groups, ethnicity groups especially. So the Taliban, unfortunately, they are not good people. So they have the same ideology. So they are, actually, we can't say Taliban is a group. Maybe we can call them the Taliban. They are an ideology. So they are a terrorist group. They were a terrorist group. They were in the blacklist of international community just 2 years ago. So that's absolutely, we are against the recognition of the Taliban, because they are not, they can't representative of Afghan people. Thank you.
Thank you. So following on what Sveto just said, it really helps us when we write about Afghanistan if you click on our stories, because everything's measured digitally now. So our editors, you know, look at, are people interested? And actually we find that stories on Afghanistan we get big audiences for, so it shows there is interest. But please, we need to keep that. It's, you know, we won't get sent to Afghanistan if people stop reading about it. So it's just a personal plea. But in terms of the recognition, yeah, you can't recognize a regime like that. But you also have to accept that they are the reality on the ground, whether we like it or not. And so I think we have to deal with them. We have to engage. And we have to keep giving humanitarian aid. I mean, some people are saying we shouldn't do that because then that's helping the Taliban. But if you don't do that, you are punishing the Afghan people who did nothing wrong. And so that would be a disastrous outcome. So, yeah.
Thank you. Well, I think that's been a great discussion, and of course a fantastic movie to kick off this discussion and to give us a very emotional and deep sense of what is happening for women and girls in Afghanistan. So all that remains is me asking you to join me in thanking this very remarkable panel. And thank you very much, and please feel free to join us outside. Thank you.
Thank you.